When I first started working at Westbridge Consulting, I felt like I was stepping into a dream. I had just married Adam, the love of my life, and his father, Richard Westbridge, was the CEO of the firm. The offer to join the company came shortly after our honeymoon, and at first, I was hesitant. Mixing family and business sounded risky, but Richard insisted. He told me he saw potential in me, that the company needed fresh ideas, and that my MBA and corporate experience made me a perfect fit. He promised this wasn't nepotism, it was merit, and I believed him. My first day was a mix of nerves and excitement. I dressed carefully, eager to prove myself. I didn't want any handouts. I wanted to be respected for my work, not for being the boss's daughter-in-law. I came in early, stayed late, and made sure I was always prepared. Richard introduced me to the team as one of the sharpest minds I've ever met. That moment stuck with me. It felt validating. Over time, my colleagues warmed up to me. Some were skeptical at first, but I earned their trust the hard way. When crises hit, like the Peterson account nearly pulling out, I worked weekends to salvage it. I coordinated with legal, redrafted contracts, and kept the client happy. Richard noticed. He called me into his office one evening and said, "You saved us this time. You've got real grit." That praise lit me up. I thought, maybe I could rise in this company, maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually, on my own merit. I imagined a future where I'd lead a department, maybe even sit at the executive table. Adam was proud, too. We'd talk over dinner about how hard I was working and how supportive his dad was. Everything seemed aligned. But slowly, little things began to feel off. I'd hear whispers in meetings, things like, "Of course she gets the client list," or "Must be nice to have the boss on speed dial." I brushed it off. I thought, just work harder. Let the results speak. I didn't want to be seen as someone who coasted on connections. I wanted to win them over. And for a long time, I thought I was succeeding. Richard gave me bigger projects, praised me during performance reviews, and even asked me to help mentor new hires. When he mentioned he was thinking about promoting someone to manage the new strategy division, I felt a flutter of hope. I had been handling cross-department initiatives for over a year. Everyone knew I was basically doing the job already. I stayed quiet, though. I didn't want to seem entitled. Instead, I doubled down, pulling late nights to build strategic frameworks, running workshops, and keeping the team motivated. One Friday afternoon, as I was wrapping up a presentation, Richard called me into his office. I thought this might be the moment. He smiled and said, "Just wanted to let you know how proud I am of what you've built here. You've really made a difference." My heart raced. I smiled back, thanked him, and waited for the news. But he didn't say anything else. I walked out a little confused, but still hopeful. The announcement, he had said, would be made the following week. That weekend, Adam mentioned that his cousin Lily was back in town. "She might be joining the company for a while," he said casually. I didn't think much of it. I'd never met Lily. She lived out of state and, from what I'd heard, bounced around between jobs. On Monday, she walked into the office like she owned it. High heels, designer purse, loud laughter. Richard introduced her as our newest talent. Something in my gut twisted, but I kept smiling. I told myself, don't jump to conclusions. She's family. Be welcoming. So I was. I helped her on board, answered her questions, and gave her a tour. She seemed disinterested in the work, but very interested in who held influence. She clung to Richard in meetings, interrupted conversations to make jokes, and name-dropped celebrities she supposedly met. People rolled their eyes behind her back. She was more socialite than strategist. But Richard was enchanted. He laughed at her stories, called her a spark of energy, and gave her visibility that took me months to earn. Still, I held my ground. I believed that in the end, work ethic would matter more than charm. That was the rule I'd lived by my whole life. But I was wrong. And I had no idea just how wrong I was, yet. For the next 3 years, I poured every ounce of energy into that company. It wasn't just a job, it became my life. I was the first one in and the last to leave, sometimes staying until the janitors started vacuuming under my desk. I skipped birthdays, anniversaries, even my own honeymoon extension, just to meet deadlines and keep projects afloat. There were weekends when Adam begged me to take a break, to go hiking or spend time with his family, but I always said, just one more proposal to finish, or just one more client call. I believed that loyalty and hard work would speak louder than anything else. I tackled the impossible. When the marketing team collapsed mid-campaign, I stepped in and led the relaunch that not only saved the client, but won us an award. When a competitor tried to poach our largest account, I negotiated a retention deal that kept them on for another 5 years. I mentored interns, trained new hires, and built a resource library that became the backbone for new project managers. No one asked me to. I just saw what needed doing and did it. And not once did I ask for credit. I wasn't looking for applause. I was looking for respect, for trust, for a future where I could rise because of what I delivered. Richard praised me in private often. "You're indispensable," he'd say. "I don't know what I'd do without you." But in public, he was more guarded. He said it wouldn't look good to show favoritism, even though I wasn't asking for favors. I was just asking to be treated like the asset he claimed I was. The truth was, I was holding that place together. When systems failed, I found workarounds. When departments feuded, I mediated. I wasn't just solving problems, I was preventing disasters. And yet, the credit always seemed to drift elsewhere. At first, I didn't notice, but slowly, the patterns became impossible to ignore. I'd submit reports that would show up in meetings with someone else's name on them. I'd propose ideas that others would later present as their own. Richard would thank them warmly, and I'd sit there invisible. Still, I kept my head down. I thought maybe it was politics. Maybe patience would pay off. I couldn't bring myself to confront him. After all, he was family. And Adam always said, "Give it time, babe. My dad moves slow with promotions, but he sees you." I clung to that belief. I even turned down an offer from a rival firm, twice the pay and a leadership role, because I didn't want to betray the man who'd given me a chance. I thought loyalty was everything. What I didn't know was that loyalty in that place only flowed one way. When Lily arrived, everything shifted. She didn't work late. She didn't deliver excellence. In fact, she often missed deadlines or handed off her tasks to others. But Richard made excuses. "She's still learning," he'd say, or "she brings a fresh perspective." Meanwhile, I was cleaning up her messes. She'd botch a presentation, and I'd rewrite it overnight. She'd miss a meeting, and I'd be the one covering for her. And yet, she'd walk into Richard's office, laugh at his jokes, and come out beaming like she'd just closed $1 million deal. The team noticed. People started asking me if I was okay. They saw me unraveling. My hair was always in a bun because I didn't have time to style it. My eyes had permanent circles under them. Coffee was my lifeline. But I kept telling myself, just hold on. Just one more review cycle. One more quarter. He has to see the difference between us. I documented everything I accomplished. I kept a running list of KPIs, client testimonials, and internal successes. I was ready. I thought, when the time comes, I'll make my case. I'll prove that I've earned the promotion, that I am the one who should lead strategy. But that time never came, because Richard had already made his decision, and it had nothing to do with merit. Lily's arrival had been positioned as temporary, a short stint to gain corporate exposure, as Richard had put it. But from the first day, it was clear she was anything but temporary. She walked into the office like it was her personal runway, loud heels echoing against the polished floor, oversized sunglasses still on even inside the lobby. She greeted people like they were extras in her show, flashing a rehearsed smile and calling everyone hon or babe, which immediately set the tone. While I had taken months to understand the company culture and earn my place, Lily bypassed all of that with charm and connection. Richard assigned her a desk close to his office, which was unheard of for someone without a title or defined role. She didn't go through HR onboarding, didn't attend training sessions, and yet somehow had access to internal files most managers couldn't even open. When I asked him about it, Richard brushed me off with, "She's family. I trust her." That phrase became the anthem of every unjustified privilege she received. She didn't understand the systems, didn't ask questions, and didn't seem to care. Her calendar was often blocked off for vague external meetings, but people saw her shopping downtown or getting lunch at trendy cafes for hours. Meanwhile, the rest of us were buried in client requests and looming deadlines. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she'd grow into the role. Maybe she was nervous. I even offered to mentor her, like I did with other new hires. But Lily made it clear she didn't think she needed help. "I'm not here to do grunt work," she said with a laugh. "I'm here to contribute big-picture ideas." That would have been fine, if she had any. Instead, she recycled buzzwords, pitched vague concepts, and often suggested changes that derailed entire projects. But Richard applauded her creativity. It was maddening. In meetings, she'd interrupt others, often with unrelated stories or ideas she hadn't thought through. When I tried to steer the discussion back, Richard would glare at me as if I were being rude. She began calling him Uncle Richie in front of the team, which made everyone uncomfortable, but no one dared say anything. Slowly, the atmosphere in the office shifted. Morale dipped. Employees whispered about favoritism, about how hard work no longer seemed to matter. Several senior staff members even left, citing cultural concerns, though no one said it outright. I tried to be the voice of reason, reminding the team to focus on their goals and their growth, but inside, I was unraveling. I couldn't understand why Richard was allowing this. Was he really so blind? Or was I the blind one, forever trusting him? The final straw came when I overheard Lily talking on the phone in the break room. She was laughing, saying, "Honestly, I don't know what these people do all day. They act like this place would fall apart without them. Please." I stood there frozen, holding my coffee cup, my heart pounding. She didn't know I was behind her. That moment crystallized everything. She didn't respect us, the work, or the company. And she certainly didn't respect me. Still, I said nothing. I didn't want drama. I believed there was still a chance to course correct. I was wrong. A week later, Richard called an all-staff meeting. He stood at the front of the room, beaming, with Lily beside him. "I want to share some exciting news," he began. My stomach turned. I already knew what was coming. "As you all know, we've been looking to strengthen our strategy division. After careful thought, I've decided to promote Lily to strategy director." The room went silent. A few people gasped. My ears rang. I stared at the floor, refusing to let anyone see the tears gathering in my eyes. Richard continued speaking, praising Lily's vision and fresh energy. She smiled like a pageant winner, waving slightly at the stunned audience. When he ended, there was a forced applause. I didn't clap. I couldn't. That night, I stayed late at the office. I stared at my reflection in the dark window, wondering how I could have been so naive. I had given everything to this place, and in the end, none of it mattered. I wasn't family enough. I wasn't flashy enough. I wasn't Lily. That's when I decided, if they wanted Lily, they could have her. But I wasn't going to leave quietly. I was going to make sure my silence wasn't mistaken for submission. The official promotion ceremony was scheduled for the following Monday, dressed up as a strategic team restructuring meeting, though everyone knew what it really was. That morning, I arrived early, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to steady myself. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to make a scene. But I wasn't going to let it pass without leaving my mark. The conference room was decorated with a ridiculous amount of balloons and a "Congrats, Lily" banner in bold metallic letters. A table in the corner was filled with catered snacks, champagne bottles, and a custom cake that read, "To New Leadership," as if this were some kind of coronation. Employees trickled in slowly, most of them wearing the same tight smiles, the ones people wear when forced to celebrate something they fundamentally disagree with. Richard stood at the head of the table, beaming like a proud father, while Lily stood next to him in a bright pink suit, grinning from ear to ear, camera ready. I took a seat in the back, silent, composed. I had already rehearsed what I was going to do, and nothing would shake me. When the clock hit 10 a.m., Richard clinked his glass and launched into his speech. He spoke about innovation, change, the importance of fresh perspectives. He sprinkled in vague phrases like evolving with the times and rewarding initiative. I watched him closely. Not once did he acknowledge the years of work I had poured into that department. Not once did he even look my way. Then came the big moment. He turned to Lily, handed her a bouquet of lilies, yes, lilies, and said, "With great pride, I officially announce Lily as our new strategy director." Applause followed, half-hearted and awkward. A few people looked toward me, unsure of what reaction to expect. I gave them nothing. Lily stepped forward and delivered a short, chirpy speech about how honored she was, how she'd bring new energy, how excited she was to collaborate with this amazing team. She didn't mention a single project, department, or strategy, just empty words delivered with a sugary smile. When it ended, people began moving toward the food table, murmuring their congratulations and trying to pretend everything was normal. That's when I stood up. I walked calmly to the front, my heart beating fast but my hands steady. I held a white envelope in my hand, addressed directly to Richard. I smiled and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "Congratulations, Lily. Looks like hard work really does pay off, just not mine." A few gasps rippled through the room. Richard's smile faded as he took the envelope from me. "What's this?" he asked, already sensing something was off. "My resignation," I said, still smiling. "Effective immediately." The room fell completely silent. Richard's face tightened. "You're not serious," he said. "We need to discuss this in private." I shook my head. "There's nothing to discuss. I've already copied HR. You'll find all the details in the letter." Lily looked stunned, blinking rapidly, unsure of whether to laugh or panic. I turned to leave, but not before adding, "Oh, and Richard, you might want to read the whole letter before you open the champagne." And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving behind the fake smiles, the lies, and the betrayal. But more importantly, I left behind a time bomb. Because inside that letter wasn't just my resignation, it was a reckoning. As I walked away from that room, I could feel the weight of every suppressed emotion lifting off my chest. The sting of betrayal, the ache of being invisible despite years of relentless dedication, and the exhaustion of constantly swallowing my pride just to keep the peace. Gone. Each step down that hallway felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, but it wasn't just a dramatic exit I had planned. It was an act of quiet defiance, executed with surgical precision. I didn't slam doors or raise my voice. I didn't need to. I knew that silence, paired with strategy, could hit harder than any public confrontation. That's why the letter wasn't emotional or angry. It was factual, cold, clinical. It was a mirror held up to Richard's face, revealing everything he had tried to ignore. I had started writing it weeks earlier, after realizing where things were headed. I included project timelines I had led, with quantifiable growth metrics and client testimonials that praised my leadership, none of which Richard had ever publicly acknowledged. I detailed how many unpaid hours I had contributed and how my strategic frameworks had been implemented across departments. But that was only the beginning. The second half of the letter was where the real damage lived. I listed instances where Lily had violated company policies, forwarding confidential documents to her personal email, missing regulatory deadlines, and breaching NDA clauses during social events. I even attached screenshots and email timestamps. I never accessed anything illegally. Everything I used was part of my job responsibilities. I had kept records, not with vengeance in mind, but with self-protection, just in case I ever needed to prove I wasn't crazy. I also pointed out that multiple employees had complained about her conduct and favoritism, only to have their concerns dismissed. I asked in the letter whether the board was aware that a promotion had been given to someone with no experience and multiple HR flags, while an employee with a spotless track record was ignored. I closed the letter by stating I would not be pursuing legal action, yet, but I would reserve the right to do so if any attempt was made to defame me or interfere with future employment. I CC'd HR, the COO, and the two senior board members Richard feared the most. That was the detonator. I didn't stay to see the explosion. I didn't need to. As I exited the building, I passed by the front desk where Sheila, our receptionist, looked at me with wide eyes and mouthed, "Did you just quit?" I nodded and smiled. "Best decision I ever made," I whispered. I walked out into the sunlight, finally breathing freely. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I lit a candle, poured myself a glass of wine, and watched the clock. I knew Richard would read the letter. I knew his pride would force him to do it immediately. I imagined his hands shaking, his face turning pale, the room going silent as he realized what I had done. And I knew that once he started reading, he wouldn't be able to stop. He would have to deal with the consequences. I didn't tell Adam right away. I needed a moment of clarity before having that conversation, but I knew it would be a storm. I also knew that I wasn't afraid anymore. I had nothing left to lose. The job, the validation, the approval. I didn't need them. What I needed was truth. And I had just delivered it, gift-wrapped in corporate stationery. The next morning, I turned off my work phone permanently. I didn't check my emails. I took a walk around the city, feeling invisible in the best possible way. No one knew my story. No one saw me as the overachiever or the failure. I was just a woman starting over, on her own terms. And somewhere back in that glossy office tower, Richard Westbridge was dealing with the mess he never thought he'd have to face. He had underestimated me. They all had. But now, my silence had spoken louder than any scream ever could. What Richard didn't realize when he opened my resignation letter was that it wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of his unraveling. I had spent weeks crafting every word with deliberate intent, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I had been silenced too long, overlooked too many times, and betrayed so deeply that the only way I could leave with dignity was by forcing him to finally see the wreckage he had created. The letter began professionally, thanking him for the opportunity and expressing appreciation for the early mentorship he once offered. It was warm enough to seem graceful but neutral enough to avoid suspicion. But as he kept reading, the tone shifted. I laid out, with timestamps and attached documentation, the specific projects I had led and saved, initiatives that had kept key clients from leaving and had brought in over $6 million in new contracts. I highlighted instances where Lily had either failed or sabotaged progress. I included copies of emails where she missed legal deadlines, sent unvetted materials to clients, and had to be bailed out by me or other team members. I also referenced an internal audit from a year prior, which Lily had failed to comply with due to personal scheduling conflicts, something that had nearly triggered a compliance breach. These were not emotional grievances. These were factual, measurable failures, backed by data. I even cited anonymous feedback from exit interviews, which HR had buried, where staff expressed growing concern about favoritism, lack of leadership transparency, and the dangerous trend of rewarding charm over competence. I asked, quite pointedly, how long he intended to protect incompetence at the expense of the company's health. And then came the real weapon, the final page. There. I included a private report I had compiled after overhearing Lily brag about having access to sensitive employee files and client data. I discovered she had been forwarding confidential information to her personal email, including private salary spreadsheets, internal restructuring plans, and even one document that detailed upcoming layoffs, info she casually mentioned at a dinner party, according to a mutual friend who called me in a panic. I had already flagged this to IT, who confirmed the breach but were instructed by upper management to drop the matter. I named names. I attached the logs. And I made it crystal clear that I had retained copies of everything. I didn't make threats. I didn't need to. I simply stated that my legal counsel advised me to document this situation carefully, and that any attempts to silence, intimidate, or mischaracterize my exit would be met with formal action. I concluded the letter by saying I hoped the company could recover from this pattern of nepotism and mismanagement, but I would no longer be a part of it. I CC'd HR, legal, the COO, and 2 board members I had briefed anonymously weeks before. That wasn't an accident. I wanted this letter to hit Richard from above and below. I wanted the people he reported to, and the people who reported to him, to see it at the same time. A ripple effect. A corporate reckoning. I didn't stick around to watch it unfold, but I imagined it all vividly. Richard standing in his office, red-faced, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. Lily asking what was wrong while trying to take a selfie with the bouquet she never earned. The HR rep staring at her inbox, reading my words and knowing that inaction would now be traceable. The COO calling an emergency meeting. I imagined all of it, and I smiled. Not out of malice, but because I had finally told the truth. For too long, I had been loyal to people who didn't deserve it. For too long, I had convinced myself that being quiet was the same as being strong, but silence only protects the guilty. And I was done protecting anyone who wouldn't even give me the dignity of being seen. I never planned to burn bridges. But if the bridge is built on lies, maybe burning it down is the only path to freedom. As I dropped the final sealed copy in the building's outgoing mail tray, I felt a stillness I hadn't felt in years. I had done everything I could. I had spoken the truth. And now it was Richard's turn to deal with the fire. The boss explodes. The office freezes. The moment Richard finished reading the letter, the shift in the office was instant. He was standing in the middle of the break room, glass of champagne still in hand, when his expression went from smug amusement to complete, uncontrolled rage. The blood drained from his face as he scanned the last lines, then flushed deep red as he realized the scope of what had just landed in his lap. He didn't try to hide his reaction. He couldn't. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, shaking the pages like they were on fire. The room, which had been buzzing with shallow congratulations and small talk, went silent. All eyes turned to him. Lily looked confused at first, still holding her bouquet, then visibly paled as Richard's voice cracked through the tension. "She's accusing us of misconduct? Of negligence? This is slander," he barked, but no one stepped forward to agree. The champagne fizzled in forgotten glasses. The cake sat untouched. People stood frozen, wide-eyed, uncertain whether to flee or stay rooted in place to witness the collapse. Richard stormed out of the room, letter in hand, muttering curses as he headed for his office. Lily chased after him, her heels clicking desperately, asking what was wrong, but he waved her off with a snarl. Behind them, the staff looked at one another, the tension breaking into a wave of whispers. A few people who had worked closely with me exchanged knowing glances. They'd suspected something like this was coming, but no one had expected it to be so precise, so public, and so damning. The letter was being forwarded and read within minutes. One of the senior analysts had a copy open on his screen and kept saying, "She kept receipts. Oh my God. She really kept everything." Others gathered in small circles, murmuring about the compliance breaches, the misuse of data, the board members who had been CC'd. What had once been a tightly controlled culture of intimidation and silence now boiled with unspoken relief. People had been afraid to speak up for years, but I had done it, and I had done it in a way no one could ignore. Inside Richard's office, shouting could be heard. "You told me this was handled," he bellowed, likely to someone in HR or legal. "Do you realize who she sent this to? We are exposed. Do you understand what she just did?" His voice cracked with fury and fear. Meanwhile, Lily emerged from the office looking like someone had slapped her. She walked past the break room slowly, her eyes scanning the space like she was searching for something solid to hold onto, but all she found were cold stares and awkward silence. No one rushed to comfort her. No one looked impressed anymore. Richard spent the rest of the day behind closed doors. Meetings were canceled. HR went silent. A few hours later, word spread that an emergency board session had been scheduled. The COO, who hadn't been in the office that day, flew in the next morning. By then, the damage was done. Richard's credibility was shattered. He had ignored multiple red flags. He had promoted a relative over a seasoned expert. He had protected someone careless with sensitive data. Now it was all in writing, with dates, documents, and undeniable proof. And worse, he couldn't claim ignorance. He had been warned. He had chosen to protect Lily instead. The board wasn't just furious. They were scared. Legal exposure, loss of client trust, internal morale collapse. Within 48 hours, internal investigators were reviewing every policy decision Richard had made in the last year. HR was forced to acknowledge the complaints they'd buried. IT logs were pulled. Lily's access was revoked. By the end of the week, both Richard and Lily were temporarily suspended pending review, but everyone knew what that meant. They were done. The office, once an environment of performative smiles and silent fear, was now humming with something new: vindication. People whispered my name not with pity but with respect. "She did it," they said. "She finally took him down." And though I wasn't there to see it, I knew exactly how it felt. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come with screaming matches or courtroom drama. Sometimes it comes in the form of a letter, a quiet, strategic, brutal truth that brings an empire to its knees. When Adam called me that night, I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready. I knew what was coming: a storm of confusion, anger, and guilt, none of which belonged to me. But when I finally listened to the message, his voice trembled. "I don't know what happened at the office today," he said, "but Dad is freaking out. He said you humiliated him. He won't tell me what's in the letter. Just, please call me. I didn't call, not yet, because I needed to decide whether I could forgive the one person who should have seen this coming. Adam wasn't a bad man. He wasn't cruel or dismissive like his father, but he had been silent, blind, willfully detached. For years, I had come home exhausted, crying quietly in the shower, venting about how hard I was working without recognition. And each time, he said the same thing. Just hang in there, babe. My dad will come around. But he never did. And Adam never pushed him. Not once. When I finally agreed to talk, I didn't hold back. I laid everything out. The missed opportunities, the gaslighting, the data Lily leaked, the proof I'd gathered, the complaints HR ignored. Adam sat across from me, pale and speechless. You knew things were bad, I said. But you never really asked how bad. He tried to defend himself, said he didn't want to meddle, said he thought it would blow over, said he trusted his father. That was your first mistake, I told him. The silence that followed was the kind that says everything. From that moment on, something fractured between us. He wasn't angry with me, but he was angry with himself, and embarrassed. His family name was now associated with corporate corruption and internal scandal. His cousin had been exposed as incompetent and careless. His father, a man who once ruled his company like a king, was now being investigated by his own board. And all of it came from a letter I wrote in our shared apartment while he slept. The fallout wasn't limited to the office. Family gatherings were canceled. Adam's mother called me crying, begging me to fix this and accusing me of ruining everything. I reminded her that the only thing I had done was tell the truth. She hung up. Word spread quickly through their social circle. Former clients, partners, and even local press caught wind of the scandal once 2 board members resigned in protest. Richard's name, once synonymous with success and integrity, was now attached to favoritism, data breaches, and leadership failure. I heard from a friend inside the firm that Lily tried to save herself by claiming I'd doctored the evidence. It didn't work. Logs confirmed everything. Richard tried to spin the narrative, saying he had been misled by those around him. But the board didn't buy it. They demoted him to an advisory role pending retirement, a face-saving move that fooled no one. As for Adam and me, we tried to hold on. We went to counseling. We had long, tearful conversations. But every time I looked at him, I saw the man who stood silently while I was drowning. I saw someone who wanted peace more than justice, and I couldn't live like that anymore. Eventually, I told him I needed space. I packed a suitcase and moved into a friend's apartment for a while. He didn't fight me. He just stood at the door and said, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you." I nodded. "I'm sorry I needed protection from your family in the first place." That was the last time I saw him. In the end, the fallout wasn't just professional. It wasn't just reputational. It was personal. A marriage strained by silence. A family exposed by truth. And me, standing in the middle of it all, finally free. Not victorious in the traditional sense, but unshackled, seen. Leaving that world behind felt like stepping out of a storm cellar after years underground. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waking up to anxiety. There were no unread emails screaming for attention, no meetings waiting to test my patience, no fake smiles disguising quiet hostility. It was quiet, almost too quiet. But that silence became the space where healing began. I started small, sleeping in, walking without a destination, eating meals without looking at a clock. I deleted all my work apps and unsubscribed from every company newsletter that reminded me of the life I'd left behind. I had no plan, no job lined up, but I had something better: clarity. And that clarity led me to a startup advisory panel I'd once volunteered for during my MBA days. I reached out to one of the co-founders just to say hello, and she replied instantly, asking if I'd considered joining their leadership team. They had followed my career from afar and admired my work ethic. I told her everything: how I'd left, why I walked away, and what I needed from any future workplace: integrity, transparency, and respect. She nodded through the screen and said, "We're building that place. Come help us do it right." Within a week, I had a new role: director of strategic operations, but more importantly, a clean slate. The difference was staggering. My ideas were heard, not hijacked. My hours were respected, not exploited. My title came from merit, not marriage. For the first time, I wasn't working under someone's shadow. I was finally standing in my own light. The team was diverse, hungry, and driven by purpose. There was no tolerance for drama or ego. Feedback was honest but kind. Mistakes were learning tools, not weapons. I found myself smiling again. Not forced smiles, but the kind that come when you realize you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The work was challenging, but it fed me instead of draining me. I even caught myself looking forward to Monday mornings. I started mentoring younger women who reminded me of myself, ambitious, hopeful, and just a little afraid. I told them what I wish someone had told me. You don't owe loyalty to people who treat you like you're replaceable. You owe yourself honesty, safety, and room to grow. Some nights I'd lie in bed and think about what could have been if Richard had simply done the right thing. If he had valued competence over connection. If he had looked past bloodlines and seen the worth in those who truly built the company from the ground up. But then I remember, if he had done all that, I might still be there, grinding myself to dust, waiting for crumbs of validation. It had to fall apart for me to rebuild. I received a few messages from old coworkers, some thanking me, others asking where I landed, and a few just saying, "I wish I had the courage to do what you did." I told them they already did. Speaking up, even in whispers, takes bravery. The company I left behind eventually restructured. Richard disappeared from public view. Lily's name became synonymous with failure. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My revenge was never about destruction. It was about liberation. Rebuilding wasn't just about getting a better job or finding new people. It was about rediscovering who I was before I let ambition blind me to mistreatment. It was about walking away from anything that demanded I shrink to fit someone else's narrative. Now, I'm not just thriving, I'm grounded. I lead with empathy, build with integrity, and trust my voice. I no longer flinch when I see emails from leadership. I don't count the hours I work because they no longer feel stolen. And when I look in the mirror, I no longer see the woman who waited for permission to rise. I see the woman who took it. Months passed, and while I moved on, the echoes of my departure continued to ripple through the world I left behind. I never checked in deliberately, but people talk, and sometimes the universe has a way of bringing news to your doorstep, even when you're not looking for it. A former coworker messaged me out of the blue. "You were right. The niece couldn't handle the strategy role. She botched the Baxter pitch, and the board pulled funding." I read the message twice, not with joy or satisfaction, but with a strange calm. There it was, poetic justice, delivered not by my hands, but by the simple force of truth. The same truth I had tried to speak for years. Turns out, when you build leadership on charm and connection, rather than competence and integrity, the foundation crumbles. Lily lasted 3 months before she was asked to resign quietly. Her departure wasn't announced with champagne or cake. It happened in silence, through a short, cold email from HR citing internal realignment. I was told Richard tried to lobby for her to stay, but the board had had enough. His influence, once unshakable, had become a liability. Eventually, he retired early, not with a grand celebration, but with a barely attended luncheon that most employees skipped. The man who once walked the halls like a king had exited through the back door, reputation tattered. Adam and I never reconnected. Our lives had diverged too far. I occasionally saw his name in mutual social updates, moving cities, changing firms, starting over. I wished him peace, but I didn't wish him back. Some people are meant to stay in your past, not because they were evil, but because they were never willing to fight for you when it mattered. As for me, life became simpler and more beautiful. I spoke at a women's leadership conference 6 months later, sharing my story, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I told them about loyalty and how it should be mutual. I told them about ambition and how it should never cost your dignity. And I told them about silence, how dangerous it is when used as a shield to avoid conflict, and how powerful it becomes when wielded with truth. After the talk, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes and said, Thank you. I've been afraid to leave my toxic job because I thought walking away meant I failed. But you showed me that sometimes leaving is the bravest thing you can do. I hugged her and told her the same thing I had told myself in the mirror the day I resigned. You are not hard to value. They are just unwilling to see it. That has become my truth, my anchor. Because in the end, the most satisfying revenge isn't destruction, it's freedom. It's peace. It's the ability to look back and feel nothing but pride for how you walked away, even when everything inside you wanted to scream. Richard thought he had the last word. He thought power meant control. But true power is walking away with your head held high, your dignity intact, and your story finally your own. My legacy isn't the letter I wrote. It's the life I built after. And that life, free from manipulation and silence, is the sweetest justice of all.